Good afternoon and welcome to Change Food Eats. I'm your host, Diane Hatz, and today our guest is Jimmy Carbone. Jimmy is a New York City-based restaurateur, dedicated social entrepreneur, and event producer through his company Food Karma Projects. He was owner of Jimmy's No. 43, an East Village bar and restaurant with a focus on unique beers and a green market menu. Jimmy also co-founded the Good Beer Seal, launched Beer Sessions Radio on the Heritage Radio Network in early 2010, and is the co-author of I Like Pig, Recipes and Inspiration from New York City's Pig Island. So, Jimmy Carbone, welcome to Change Food Eats. So, before we really get started, what are you eating today?
Well, I eat kind of some of the things I always eat. I'm a big fan of She-Wolf Bakery. And,
oh my God. The absolute best bread on the planet.
The Grow NYC grains, the kind of regional grains bakeries like them in particular. So I'm eating a sprouted rye Pullman, which is very dense and perfect with a little peanut butter. Oh.
Honestly, everyone watching, if you come to New York City, you must find She-Wolf bread and eat it. I have never had anything better. It's amazing. So let's jump into my question I'm asking everybody. How can we create a food system where everyone can eat healthy food?
It seems like it's been the same question for, 12 or 15 years since we probably first met, and even when you first did the TEDx Manhattan, those seem to be the questions that everyone was asking. What I'm encouraged by, I felt like maybe 5 years ago, I think people forgot about things like farm to table, and suddenly, everyone was, having avocado toast or, I'm sorry, I've got this avocado toast or, poke, and no one was talking about, local ingredients anymore. But in the last year, I think that the work that we did and other groups like us, 10 years ago definitely informed the new generation. So there's a lot of young chefs and a lot of craft food people that I feel like are really taking the mantle, where I'm seeing like craft butchers, learning from the few in New York City and opening in other places, as an example. Separate from I'm more on the drink side. So of course, hard ciders and craft beer and craft spirits are also part of that system. But just seeing that someone, and I think to me, still like whole animal butchery is like really important, and sourcing from local farms. It just represents something. And even when, like during COVID, I've been traveling more in the Northeast. And usually when I go into a place, I'm not really looking for a farmer's market, but I am looking for like fresh eggs, but eggs from a local farmer. And sometimes when you're outside of the city, those are the hardest things. When COVID happened, you heard about it in prosperous suburbs like Bergen County, New Jersey. The Whole Foods, everything was off the shelves. But in New York City, the green markets were fully stocked. Maybe a few farmers chose not to come. They might have taken a day or two off to retool, for social distancing. But there was everything you needed. And if there wasn't a flour shortage, because there's growing NYC, grains with flour. There wasn't a meat shortage. There wasn't any shortage. And there's especially in the Northeast. So I feel like we're really lucky. And it's ironic that New York City, to me, felt the safest in terms of food systems because of the green market system, and all the other great distributors that even more commodity distributors over the last 20 years have definitely all added some form of local farm products. Even Baldor has Hudson Valley dairy component for over 10 years. So I feel like in New York City, we're really ahead of the curve. But then you go to other places, Pittsburgh and Boston and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, you've got little pockets of it where it usually seems to start with the more upscale restaurants. But anyways, those are just my general thoughts. But to me, it comes down to getting local eggs, whether it's from a community garden or a farmer. It's the basics. Getting good bread. Good bread is much harder, but of course it starts with grains. But all those things I'm seeing happening in ways that we might, like I said, might have talked about 12 or 15 years ago, but now it's real. There's such a movement of small bakers opening that are trying to use regional grains, and so I'm really encouraged, I see it, everyone sees it publicly, like with craft beer and cider, but I see it in the little things. And I much rather have, like the reason I had the she-wolf bread, I'd much rather have this nice piece of, rye bread that's made with regional, grains, than I would worry about going out to a fancier restaurant and having just an assembled dish. So.
Right. So you're obviously very knowledgeable. So why don't you tell us a little bit, for people who might not know who you are, tell us a little about like who you are. What is Pig Island? What's Jimmy's Number 43? What happened to your bar restaurant? What's this beer thing you keep talking about? So give us a background of Jimmy.
I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world in that I fell into the restaurant business when I was a few years out of college back in the 90s. And what hooked me, I was working somewhere part-time, was my interest in wine. I was thrown into a position where I just had to order. I was the head bar back. I had to order the beer and wine. And I realized I didn't know much about wine, so I went to a bookstore and got a book about wine. And I found Kermit Lynch, Adventures on the Wine Route, who, Kermit Lynch was part of the Berkeley Alice Waters scene. He was a similar story, discovered things in France, which for him was wine. And, he kind of set a lot of independent wine importers on their mission and inspired me. So I ended up taking a class at the Sommelier Society. And next thing you know, I realized that I was obsessed, and every dollar I had, I was buying wine at a wine store. And every Saturday and Sunday night, I was cooking at home, just trying to taste wines, and I would cook something. Might have been tuna au poivre once, or, some other simple dish. And other than that, I would basically make salad or pasta. So it kind of got me starting to host people at my house and tasting wines with different people, all in a very convivial kind of like, just more like, I like the term hospitality. I wasn't really, never had aspirations of fine dining or anything like that. Anyways, it kind of sped up pretty fast, where I realized, wow, I should just have a restaurant or a wine store or something where I wanted to actually have a wine license, a New York State, retail wine license, and be able to buy from my choice of importers and distributors and not have to go through wine stores and all that. So kind of my passion from the beginning was I want to be in the middle of it. I want to be connected. I want to have access to, good producers at good prices. And I had $0, which was a real number. I wasn't making that up. To me, it was like an art project. I was like, if I couldn't do it this way, then I would do something else. If I had to raise money, then I would have to go to a professional school, or I would have to do some other project. But the point was, I didn't want to raise money. I wanted to just do something. And it was the early 90s, 1994. I actually found a restaurant that all I needed was a coat of paint and the gas turned on in the East Village. That was a really rough time then. There had been the late 80s crash, and the East Village went through a lot of changes then. So literally there was a restaurant sitting there. It really needed a coat of paint, a cleaning, and the gas turned on. And then a month later, I was open.
So wait, just so everyone knows, the East Village was cool back then. Now, I don't know. I live here. Yeah. We're neighbors, actually, so I can say that because I've lived here 25 years. But Jimmy's Number 43 was actually like the place to go for many, many, many years. So that's Jimmy's, right?
The first one was Mugsy's Chow Chow. So that's how I cut my teeth. So I pretty much learned everything, even though I'd worked part-time in a restaurant. I pretty much learned in my own restaurant, everything. I was the cook, I was the manager, and I had a few good people that worked with me. And it was great because I got to keep buying wine. I made things affordable. I wanted a place where I could take a date and spend $10 total back then, which wasn't unheard of back then, but it still was very affordable.
Yeah.
And I started cooking things. I kind of figured out I could make pasta. I learned how to cook fish. I made salads, and I kept it really simple. And for 5 years, I was cooking 5 nights a week, and I was a 13-table, 25-seat restaurant in the East Village. And that's how I cut my teeth, and I really got to know the industry better that way.
So then what happened? Did you go from that to Jimmy's?
Well, then there was some things I was expanding it, and there was 9/11. So kind of the next few years, there was, again, a lot more, let's say, experimenting. Once I expanded it, I had a bar next door. I was able to, for 1 year, I had a chef, Sarah Jenkins, who came in, and we called the old kitchen part patio dining. And that's when she really cut her teeth. She basically every day hand wrote a menu. 4 times a week went to the Union Square Green Market, and literally every day of the week there was one item on that menu that was probably the best dish in New York that day, but you didn't know what it was. So one day it was a soup, one day it was a braised meat. Usually it was one of her pastas. And looking ahead to like her restaurant Pastina, a lot of the dishes that became her standards and she wrote about in cookbooks, I say she tested them out in my kitchen, but I have a feeling she already knew them because she had grown up with.
And I
so
apologize.
That was the beginning. So that, but it just, so being in the industry, I just got to meet a lot more chefs and industry people. And when I had places, I usually would open and cook myself, but then a couple of times I had really good young chefs working for me too. So I got as close to having really good chefs as most people ever would want, without having to go in really deep and raise a lot of money to open a restaurant to support them. So
are you saying Sarah was Pastina? Like that was her restaurant?
The Pastina restaurant that just closed, that Sarah was one of the partners and the chef that opened
I didn't know
it.
That.
That was 10 years ago. Oh yeah. Yeah, that was like her list of kind of classic pastas.
It's a shame. It's a shame they closed too.
Yeah, that's we can talk about the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Obsessed.
Well, let's get into that in 1 second. I have one more background thing because I did not know all the wine background you have. How did you go from wine to beer? Because you're the beer guy.
When I was working in that first restaurant, which was actually the coffee shop in Union Square, which actually just closed, that was a very trendy place. That was a great place to start working because the owners were really great. It did a high volume, but it was very trendy, but it had a really good clientele. So I was able to move a lot of
I used to hang out there. I used to hang out there, everyone. So, you know.
Yeah, I probably bust your table once or twice. I was always that guy. But anyway, so the same time, so when I started buying the wine, it was just when the craft beer movement was starting, and the guys at Brooklyn Brewery at the time had a thing called some kind of craft brewers guild. And they were just starting to sell, in addition to their own beers, certain Belgian and German, classics, and some other new American beers like Sierra Nevada or Rogue. And so I got exposed to that as well. And that just kind of grew. So over the 90s, even though I was focused on selling wine in my restaurant, I always had a small stash of really good beers. And so jump forward after 9/11 when I had my old space, the Muggsy's Chow Chow, and we had put in the bar next door. At some point, one of those beer distributors encouraged me to add some draft beer, and we started drinking some American beer like Abita and Victory, which was newer in Pennsylvania. So that kind of got me geared up for beer. So by 2005, the lease and everything had been up at that location, which was on 2nd Avenue in the East Village between 1st and 2nd Streets. Right now, it's like it would be 2 doors down from the Rosie's on the corner of 2nd and 2nd now. The building's been renovated, so it's a different building. It used to be this little restaurant. It was an old cafe, luncheonette, had changed hands a lot, and it was in between a funeral home and a monument store. So the vibes were, definitely traditional. By the time I left, we had 2 gay bars on either side in my restaurant, and I was very proud of the changes we had made. From death to life. It was
the days back in the day.
20 years ago. Yeah.
We'll be back shortly with today's guest, Jimmy Carbone. But right now, let's go check in with our health and wellness expert, Chef Ebeth Johnson. Ebeth, what are you cooking up today?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ebeth Johnson, your mindful eating coach and wellness mentor. Today, let's talk takeout. As you know, the landscape of restaurants is shifting with so many of us spending so much more time at home. We are ordering in a whole lot more and eating out much less. The challenge, whether we're eating at the restaurant or we're ordering delivery, is how do we make the healthiest choices possible? Now, this is especially important right now when many of us are ordering more takeout because we are sitting at home in front of our computers for so many more hours a day, and we are moving so much less. Now, we all know this combination of lots of restaurant food coupled with not so much moving about can lead to extra unwanted pounds and a decrease in our momentum towards our weight and wellness goals. And none of us want that. So how can we enjoy our takeout and delivery while staying in alignment with our weight and wellness goals? Well, we can begin by setting a positive intention. Now, yes, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and yes, life's a bit crazy right now, but these are exactly the reasons why setting a positive intention are so important. It's in these moments of stress that we really need to focus on our intentions. Now, your intention can be something like, I'm stuck at home during this crazy time, and I'm still going to do my very best to choose foods and meals that align with my weight and wellness goals. Then, when it comes time to decide what you're going to pick off the menu, we need to choose healthy options. When choosing a healthy option off the menu, we need to look at the wording used to describe a dish. What we want to do is look for words like grilled, broiled, steamed, and roasted. And we want to avoid dishes that are described with words like fried, breaded, smothered, Alfredo, rich, and creamy. These tend to be loaded with extra fat and calories that we don't need. Now, I'm going to keep it real because I know that neither you or I are going to always make the healthy steamed choice off of the takeout menu, right? Because sometimes we all just want the Kung Pao chicken or the pizza or the burger and fries. So what do we do then? So then we focus on healthy sides and our portion size. So no matter what you plan to order, you can make your takeout healthier by serving it with a side of low starch, high fiber, high nutrient vegetables that are steamed or lightly sauteed, or maybe they're in a salad. So you can either make these sides yourself if you feel inclined, or you can order them off the menu from the restaurant you're already getting takeout from. Then, when it comes time to serve, you gotta fill half of your plate with those great vegetables. Now, filling half of your plate with these nutrient-dense veggies puts you squarely on the path towards a mindful portion size that aligns with your weight and wellness goals. So, what about the rest of your plate? So, when you're ready to serve up your takeout, usually our takeout orders are huge. There's so much more food than anyone can eat, right? So I would encourage you to first not eat out of the container, which my husband loves to do, by the way, and I try to discourage that. And instead serve yourself directly onto the plate and fill up the other half or quarter of the plate with the food that you've received from the takeout. Then, when it comes time to eat your beautifully plated meal, start with your veggies first. And you don't have to eat all of your veggies before you dig into that other tasty stuff on your plate, but I do encourage you to take at least 2 or 3 bites and maybe eat a quarter to half of the veggies that are on your plate, because when you do that, you set the flavor preferences for vegetables first, you fill yourself up with the good stuff first, and you can't use that excuse, I'm too full to eat my veggies, because you started with your veggies first. So those are my tips for helping you to eat your takeout in a more healthy way. I am Ebeth Johnson, and until I see you next time, I'm sending you love and light and deliciousness on your path. I'll see you next time.
How do you see the food system changing for the better or for the worse?
Well, I think
Post-pandemic.
one thing of COVID is that, like I said, so many people, at least of let's call them the food class, people that have access to food and the time to cook and everything, have really taken to cooking. and baking. So that's part of the flour shortages you read about from the supermarkets. Well, people were baking in ways they hadn't in generations, and that opens the door to, well, grow NYC regional grains. There are farmers that they've been developing for 15 years, everywhere from Maine to upstate New York to Vermont, that are growing those types of grains, and there's mills to process them, and there's markets like she-wolf bread or just home bakers. And the home baker scene already, like in January, I think 5 years ago, so fast forward, yes, I had a place called Jimmy's Number 43 in the East Village, and it was known as a craft beer place, but we also we were the place where Cider Week New York was first hosted. And 5 years ago, we hosted with Slow Food and NYC one of the first slow bread meetups, where there were some home bakers, and there were some bakeries like She-Wolf and Runner and Stone sampling bread and talking about it. But then after that, for the next couple of years, Grow NYC took up the mantle, and part of their education, kind of like home brewers helped educate people to make beer, home bakers are starting to work with local grains. And this past January, there was a huge home bakers meetup sponsored by Grow NYC Green Markets. And I believe there were 100 different home bakers who were actually exhibiting, and you could taste the different things they made. And I think the only requirement was that they had to use some regional grains or flours in their product.
Was this pre-pandemic?
This was pre-pandemic. So there already was the things. I feel that one thing about the pandemic is that things that were already happening have just been able to get legs, like Zoom. We're doing Zoom. We're paying by Venmo. Just two examples. Suddenly now this is how you do things. So already there was interest. The system has to be in place. There's already been for 15 years a regional grains economy developing, and there was already the interest in education happening. But now suddenly, wow, the people of our foodie class who are home get the chance to bake, and they have access to regional flours, as well as King Arthur and other really good, products, and Bob's Red Mill. So I don't know, that's a change that I like, personally.
Do you see anything happening for the worse? Like a downside?
The downside is also, again, something that's been happening. I mean, restaurants, I'm a restaurant business guy, and I still am. Restaurant business in New York City is definitely suffering if you're talking about the old model, which assumes you're going to have 3 seatings at night, 6 nights a week, with people coming with expense accounts and having dinner and drinks and everything. But, even 5 years ago, the trends that I've seen were that already 5 years ago, the shift, more people were already ordering takeout and delivery or delivery to their home 5 years ago than eating in. So the shifts were already happening. So the last few years, the struggles have been about, the fees that Seamless charges to restaurants.
Exactly.
So those have already been happening. So now, if anything, the places that were set up to do takeout, delivery, I know a great place is more of a beer bar pub, Alphabet City Beer on Avenue C, ABC Co. He was able to flip, and he's like a grocery store. He sells a lot of cheese, and he still sells his beer. So some restaurants are going to flip to definitely anyone with a restaurant, if they have more than one restaurant, is definitely going to close locations. Some of them are going to morph and have a kitchen that's more of a takeout, delivery, commissary, because people are still eating. And there's probably going to be fewer restaurants, at least in Manhattan, than there were for a while. But that's always going to go up and down. When I got my first restaurant in 1994, in the East Village, you could walk from Houston Street to St. Mark's on a Friday night, and there was only one restaurant open then. Partly for two reasons. One, because the economy had been bad, but two, the other half of the restaurants that were open were closed and renovating because they knew a change was coming. So you might see now restaurants that are closed many of them are just sitting tight, like the restaurant I'm part of.
Dude, you're very optimistic. I'm not as optimistic as you.
You have to be optimistic because you look at.
I want to be. I want to be.
You look at the Spanish influenza. You know, it might be a year, it might be 2 years. So we're all tightening our belts. We've all been for 7 months living in, you know, hovels, whatever our nearest apartments are. You know, 3 people living in where one should and never going out. Thank God for the green market and for walks, you know.
I know. I had to every day. And in the beginning, it was so bad because I didn't know how you could get it, whatever. So I was like swabbing everything down, but I had to go out at least around the block. But I don't know. I think I got some kind of, not phobia, but I have some kind of like syndrome now because I wouldn't leave like a 3-block radius for like 6 months. Like I just couldn't go above 14th or west of Broadway. It was crazy. Anyway, so I'm glad you're really optimistic about it. I think because I saw so many people moving out, and my my mail carrier said that in 1 week, I think he said in March or May, in 1 week, 10,000 people in 1 week in zip code 10003 put in change of address notices. That's like a lot of people leaving. So I guess I don't know. I want your optimism.
The numbers are real. Let's put it this way. I've talked to Con Edison. There's a lot of accounts getting turned off across the city. The same thing, a lot of people moving out. But don't forget, the East Village in particular, again, the last 5 years or 10 years is very transient. You know, every year or two, you're getting in students or recent grads or other young professionals. That's been a big issue for the restaurants. You know, everything that we're seeing, I mean, don't make me sound like a crazy person, but everything we're seeing goes back to 9/11. After 9/11, we
differ on this. We differ on this one.
But that the East Manhattan people moved like out to more to certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and those neighborhoods they were going out to restaurants more. So maybe if they worked in Manhattan, then instead of staying in Manhattan, they would go back home, and then you start thriving areas wherever people lived in Brooklyn, for example. That was that. Well, now the last 10 years, the trend is more and more people are working in Brooklyn. So you have the Brooklyn Navy Yard, you have Industry City, you have downtown Brooklyn. And I sat on I watched a panel at Brooklyn Navy Yard a year and a half ago, and they were saying this. So the trend is, again, these trends have already been happening. Brooklyn is thriving. Brooklyn has more jobs and more people living there than ever. And Manhattan's the one that's dependent on international travelers, students, business travelers, and tourists. So
just so you know, if you haven't heard yet, there's a shift back to Manhattan. The shift is starting.
And I'm okay with that. Yeah, no, I'm just saying. So it's been hard because for small businesses, in particular in restaurants, there's more of a transit. Even the residents might have been only here for a couple of years. There's a lot of tourists and business, and I'm not knocking it.
There's no. Anyways, see, this is the thing. This is the thing. There's no tourists now. I was just Midtown, which I hadn't gone to for 6 months, and like at Times Square, there are some people 6 months later, but there's no tourists. Like it's different, and the energy's different. It's just different. So anyway, I don't mean to be doom and gloom.
No, it's going crazy.
Yeah, I'm just, because people say, oh, this is like 9/11. This is not like 9/11. 9/11, you could still go in a restaurant and eat. People were scared to go out because of 9/11, but they weren't scared to walk in a restaurant because they might get a disease and die. So what do you think about restaurants reopening? We're recording this a little early, so restaurants just were allowed to have indoor dining starting today. But what's your feeling like? I have to be honest, I'm not eating inside. I'll eat outside with a heat lamp. I'm not going to eat in a restaurant.
I've eaten inside. I've already been outside of the city, upstate New York, other states like Massachusetts. You can eat inside. And the whole thing is everyone's been following the guidelines. The same way, do you go to the Apple store, Diane? The Apple store, you get your temperature checked when you walk in.
Yeah, not now.
You got to wear your mask. Well, I have. I went to the Apple store starting in June. And inside, there might be 50 staff and 50 customers spread out. We've been going to Whole Foods And Target stores, since this started, they never closed. So I go to my pharmacy, I go to my supermarket. There are people in there. The whole thing with the restaurants, it's the space. I'm not
Right.
I'm not an expert, but I'll tell you this. If you have 6 feet apart and every other table's blocked off, and you only go in with a small group, 2 or 3 people or 4 people, you're fine. It's if we can't do that, then we shouldn't be going into pharmacies and department stores and supermarkets.
I think there's a difference with you being somewhere quickly and you sitting somewhere for 2 hours. And I think from what I understand, it's ventilation. But anyway, I'm not arguing with you.
Who knows?
I'm more conservative and probably was a little more freaked out. Like I still went to my grocery store, but that was about it. There's a bakery. There's this great French bakery on 2nd Avenue I would go to, but that was it. What do you think about the Open Streets program?
Amazing.
And the Open Streets program, just the Open Streets program, if you don't have in your area, is where restaurants are allowed to put tables out and where the parking lanes were. And they've built these like wooden, and they've made some really creative ones, but they basically built outside spaces. And then where I live in the East Village, they've decided to stick them all on the sidewalk. So when I'm fostering dogs, I got to take my dog who's peeing on everything, buy everyone having, but it's been fine. Everyone's had a good attitude.
It's like Rome and Paris. You know, I mean, my dream has been like, since I had my first restaurant, I wanted that feel of Rome in the summer when you just put all your tables outside, because why not? That's what you should do. And why would you want to eat inside in the summer? Well, we finally got that with outdoor dining. And this one thing, the city really stepped up. And I can say this, I might upset some people. The process for getting outdoor seating with a Sidewalk Cafe license was very antiquated and very expensive. And what happens is, you can see my politics are more about, I'm a small business and about good food. And when you have a small cafe, you're the one that most needs to put out 4 tables outside so that people on a nice day can sit outside.
Right.
But unfortunately, the regular Sidewalk Cafe license application, which was pre-COVID, was very expensive, and you had to hire a top lawyer to do this and go through the process involved many city agencies just to put your tables outside. So it was prohibitive for the average, cafe or something. Right. Now everyone was basically carte blanche. It was a very simple application. I was part of a couple of these on my street, on East 7th Street. I was very proud to see them roll out fast. You were improved instantly. There was no fee. And why not? Why not be able to put tables safely on the streets? And there's limitations. You can't block a bus lane, of course. There's some guidelines. But
right, and you have to eat
need
food.
To go through so many hoops. You didn't need to go through the community board. Listen, you're already a licensed restaurant. You've already got a liquor license. You're not trying to open a new liquor license across from a church or a school. So I really believe that this was a really good thing, and I'm really proud. I'm proud of the mayor that he said we're going to do this permanently, at least for next year, because it gives. We're talking about hope. The whole thing with restaurants and small food. You probably didn't expect to get this talk from me, but I'm much more about. I've been more of a small business advocate the last couple of years, but by necessity. And the hope is that you have to know, okay, there's a system, and that system is that you can put out tables every year in the good weather. Wow, there's hope. That means there's another reason for me to stick it out through this winter. Even if I have to close temporarily and make a deal with my landlord, I know that come next spring, which often can be March in the city, when the weather's nice, I'm going to be able to run seating outside. And that'll keep me in business. If I were a regular small family business restaurant. So those are things that restaurants need. You talk about food systems, it's the same thing. It's just knowing that the markets are going to be there. And we have to believe that this pandemic will somehow end, of course, with the proper methods. We know that social distancing works. We know that mask wearing works. We also know that testing and proper healthcare is important, people that...
Jimmy. I got to be honest. No, I've been tested. Look, I've been tested twice. Besides the fact it took over 2 weeks to get the results. Over 2 weeks. you get this huge disclaimer that says, just because you test negative doesn't mean you don't have it, which means why get the test?
Yeah, it's something we're all learning. But I have read a little bit about the Spanish influenza, which seems to be a good parallel to this. And a lot of the things that seem to be worked then. Mask wearing, the schools. Back then, the emphasis on schools was different because schools then were kind of the savior of the working class and immigrants. So schools stayed open, but they had outdoor classrooms. And I saw pictures of it, and it was very powerful. And originally schools were not closed because they figured that was how the kids that needed help the most needed to go to school. They had meals there. There were nurses. If you were sick, you would get checked and pulled aside. And that's a whole other issue. Schools, but school, we're talking about food and food systems. Half the kids in New York City get free school lunch. And
well, I
no
do
one's
have to
arguing
say,
that.
well, and it took
There might be more.
well, it took them 4 or 5 months, but anybody, student or not, can get food, and they can get it delivered in New York City. So they've done, even if schools are open or closed, children can still get food, because that was one of the biggest things, because it's probably a bigger number than you said. It's a huge number of children rely on school meals. So the city, I have to give the city a lot of credit for working as fast as they could to make sure that people got food.
Yeah, and that was the biggest, I just want to finish first. Food systems, we forget how important, like, hospitals and prisons and schools are some of the largest, purchasers of wholesale food. So if you really care about a food system, I know that I think in New York State, the public hospitals have to buy a certain percentage of New York State fruit. A friend Bob Lewis told me that once. So there's ways that if these government, funded institutions are large purchases of food, these are again things we talked about 10 or 12 years ago. Well, then we have to figure out ways to get, small farms or regional food into these institutions. And I think no one's talking about that. We know that we're feeding a lot of kids every day through the school system. So why can't we also give them, food from small farms and work on that?
I interviewed a farm to school coordinator, so I assumed that meant that there was efforts underway to get food from local farms into cafeterias. She does taste testings. She's not allowed to incorporate it in the menu. So yeah, I think that's a huge thing that has to be worked on more seriously. So, I'm really happy to speak with you because just so everyone knows, this is being recorded the day after that presidential debate. So I'm not in the best mood. I was a little traumatized last night. So, I seem to notice that a lot of places like in the UK and some other countries, after they started indoor dining, spikes occurred. So then things got shut down. Are you feeling pretty confident that we'll be able to handle this and we're not going to? I mean, I know it has started to increase here. There's trouble in Brooklyn with increased cases. But do you think that there's not going to be a huge, massive uptick in COVID cases with people eating indoors?
I don't know, Diane. I mean, I'm not a public health person, I'm not a scientist, but again, comparing what I see when I go to the pharmacy or a convenience store and other essential businesses, and the fact that I'm able to go into a coffee bar and get a coffee to go, I don't think it's be that different if 25% occupancy, spreading out these tables, a couple people at each table. We're not talking about a disco. We're not talking about, giant birthday parties. We're talking about people eating civilized, maybe having coffee and a meal, maybe having a drink. We're not talking about people sitting at a bar. We're not talking about people. So, and I saw that happen when outdoor dining rolled out. The state and city did a really great job. It was hard in a lot of bars, but to basically say you have to be seated, you have to be served, and you have to have some food. And I know that that ruffled some feathers, but that was sure better than not having outdoor dining. And I think that the model's been set. I think that the good operators, the ones who are open, who have been doing this, are all good operators. And when you see the numbers that the state, from the inspections, less than 1 or 2% of liquor license establishments in New York City you would have called bad operators just for that. So most of them did it properly. And when they were told everyone has to sit, you have to serve them, they have to have some food, and there has to be social distancing, you can manage that in a restaurant. And some will do it by having reservations. The main thing is you can walk in and see if there's too many people, leave. Or the restaurant's going to tell you, actually, we only have 5 tables and they're all spread apart. We're full for tonight. Then you can go however their takeout is, or you can go to another place. Right. So I don't think
my thing is with open streets continuing, people like me, I have a choice. Like, I would rather not eat inside. Yeah. I just don't want to take the risk, but I have the option. And I know they'll get heat lamps and stuff. Right.
Yeah. I think I'd stay outside until it's 30 degrees. I love it.
I even think if you've got some good heat lamps, man, I don't know. Arctic dining. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
I'd like to say that I think that everything we're talking about, I know we will get through the pandemic, and it's really hard. And sadly, a lot of people are moving. A lot of businesses will close. And I just know that whatever trends are happening, we're talking about are already starting 5 years ago. Whether it was issues of seamless charging too much for restaurants because more and more people wanted to order takeout, or whether the rents were too high, or landlords weren't reasonable with small, undercapitalized businesses. None of these things have changed the same way that, again, we're doing Venmo more, we're doing PayPal, we're doing Zooms. All these trends were in place. We're ordering from Amazon. Well, 5 years ago, we were complaining about how Amazon's taking away from retail stores. Well, it still is. But those are things that we can't fight everything. We can't fight every change. I think the one thing with the pandemic is that some operators have been pushed to realize, wow, we have to do more of the takeout model. We have to have these outdoor dining and open restaurant streets. We have to also have maybe a grocery or prepared meal model. And I've seen some really creative, there was a restaurant in Tribeca called Holy Ground, NYC. Some really cool young guys, Franco, and they were doing like Haute barbecue, where it's like a upscale restaurant but with a barbecue menu. And they were doing, I think they're still doing it on Wednesday nights on Christie Street outside of Ray's Bar, 177 Christie Street. They've got a really nice smoker on the back of a 66 Chevy pickup truck, and they're selling outside of the bar. I think it keeps going. There's a lot of innovators, and and that's the one thing about the restaurant industry and small business. You have to innovate. You have to keep going. And
I do think you're right. I think that because I had heard a lot of restaurants and chefs have been talking for years about how almost impossible it is to keep a restaurant in New York City anymore because it's so expensive. So I think the pandemic just accelerated what was going to happen with a lot of restaurants. But it's scary. I mean, it's scary. And then anyway, it's going to be great. It's going to be a whole new New York City. Get me out of my Debbie Downer mood. Okay, Jimmy, final words.
A walk.
Cheer me up. Oh, I was just out.
Go for a walk. Go to Tompkins Square Park.
Oh, talk about something that's changed for the better. I lived in Tompkins this summer. It's how I survived.
It was beautiful. It's one of the nicest parks in the city,
It is now. 1990 it wasn't when I moved here.
Well, listen, let's pretend we're young again.
Jimmy's final words, everyone, is just find a positive stoop to sit on. A friendly stoop. Or a friendly stoop to sit on. Okay, well, listen, Jimmy, thank you so much. We will keep a lookout for your next event.
Okay.
And that concludes another great conversation with our guest, Jimmy Carbone. Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember that we are airing the shows on the first and third Tuesday of every month. And if you would like, you can always go back and watch all our previous episodes. Just go to Change Food and you will find the talk show tab and just click into that. Thank you and eat well.